Spanish literature generally refers to literature written in the Spanish language within the territory that presently constitutes the state of Spain. Its development coincides and frequently intersects with that of other literary traditions from regions within the same territory, particularly Catalan literature, Galician literature, and more recently a formal Basque literature. In its earliest form, Spanish literature intersects as well with Latin, Jewish, and Arabic literary traditions of the Iberian Peninsula. The literature of Spanish America is an important branch of Spanish literature, with its own particular characteristics dating back to the earliest years of Spain's conquest of the Americas. The Roman conquest and occupation of the Iberian Peninsula beginning in the 3rd century BC brought a Latin culture to Spanish territories. The arrival of Muslim invaders in 711 CE brought the cultures of the Middle and Far East. In medieval Spanish literature, the earliest recorded examples of a vernacular Romance-based literature mixed Muslim, Jewish, and Christian culture. One of the notable works is the epic poem Cantar de Mio Cid, written in 1140. Spanish prose gained popularity in the mid-13th century. Lyric poetry in the Middle Ages includes popular poems and the courtly poetry of the nobles. During the 15th century, the pre-Renaissance occurred and literary production increased greatly. In the Renaissance, important topics were poetry, religious literature, and prose. In the Baroque era of the 17th century, important works were the prose of Francisco de Quevedo and Baltasar Gracian. A notable author was Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, famous for his masterpiece Don Quixote de la Mancha. In the Enlightenment era of the 18th century, notable works include the prose of Fray Benito Geronimo Fajo, Gaspar Melchor de Jovellanos, and José Cadalso, the lyric of Juan Melende Valde, Tomás de Iriart and Félix María Samaniego, and the theatre, with Leandro Fernández de Moratín, Ramón de la Cruz and Vicente García de la Huerta. In Romanticism, important topics are the poetry of José de Espronceda and other poets, prose, the theatre, with Angel de Saavedra, José Zorrilla, and other authors. In realism, which is mixed with naturalism, important topics of the novel, with Juan Valera, José María de Pereda, Benito Pérez Galdós, Emilio Pardo Bayes and Leopoldo Alas, Armando Palacio Valde, and Vicente Blasco Ibanez, poetry, with Ramón de Campoamor, Gaspar Núñez de Arce, and other poets, the theatre, with José Echegaray, Manuel Tamayo Huibos, and other dramatists, and the literary critics, emphasizing Menéndez Pelayo. In modernism, several currents appear: Parnasianism, symbolism, futurism, and creationism. The destruction of Spain's fleet in Cuba by the U.S. in 1898 provoked a crisis in Spain. A group of younger writers, among them Miguel de Unamuno, Pío Baronia, and José Martínez Ruiz, made changes to literature's form and content. By the year 1914, the year of the outbreak of the First World War and of the publication of the first major work of the generation's leading voice, José Ortega y Gasset, a number of slightly younger writers had established their own place within the Spanish cultural field. Leading voices include the poet Juan Ramón Jiménez, the academics and essayists Ramón Menéndez Pidal, Gregorio Marañón, Manuel Azana, Eugene Dawes, and Ortega y Gasset, and the novelists Gabriel Miró, Ramón Pérez de Ayala, and Ramón Gómez de la Serna. Around 1920, a younger group of writers, mostly poets, began publishing works that from the beginnings revealed the extent to which younger artists were absorbing the literary experimentation of the writers of 1898 and 1914. poets were closely tied to formal academia. Novelists such as Benjamin Llanes, Rosa Chasel, Francisco Ayala, and Ramon J. Sender were equally experimental and academic. The Spanish Civil War had a devastating impact on Spanish writing. Among the handful of Civil War poets and writers, Miguel Hernández stands out. During the early dictatorship, literature followed dictator Francisco Franco's reactionary vision of a second Spanish Golden Age. By the mid-1950s, just as with the novel, a new generation which had only experienced the Spanish Civil War in childhood was coming of age. By the early 1960s, Spanish authors moved towards a restless literary experimentation. When Franco died in 1975, the important work of establishing democracy had an immediate impact on Spanish letters. Over the next several years, a wealth of young new writers, among them Juan José Millás, Rosa Montero, Javier Marías, Luis Mateo Díaz, José María Merino, Félix de Azúa, Cristina Fernández Cubas, Enrique Vila Matas, Carme Riera, and later Antonio Muñoz Molina and Almudena Grandes, would begin carving out a prominent place for themselves within the Spanish cultural field. Renaissance. During the 15th century, the pre-Renaissance occurs. Literary production increases very greatly. Some outstanding poets of the century are Juan de Mena and Inigo López de Mendoza. The Spanish literature of the Middle Ages concludes with the work La Celestina by Fernando de Rojas. In the Renaissance, important topics are Renaissance poetry, with Garcilaso de la Vega and Juan Boscan; religious literature, with Fray Luis de Leon, San Juan de la Cruz, and Santa Teresa de Jesus; and Renaissance prose, with the anonymous El Lazarillo de Tormes. The principal features of the Renaissance were the revival of learning based on classical sources, the rise of courtly patronage, the development of perspective in painting, and the advances in science. The most important characteristics of the Renaissance are: the language in this age is dominated by naturalness and simplicity, which avoids affectation, amanamiento, and the oversearched phrase. Thus the vocabulary and the syntax will be simple. The preferred themes are, fundamentally, love, conceived from the Platonic point of view; nature, a somewhat idyllic pagan mythology, from which the histories of gods and the female beauty are reflected, following always the same classical ideal. In relation to these themes mentioned, various Renaissance points exist, some of them taken from the classical world. Carpe Diem, whose translation would be, seize the day, or take advantage of the moment. It advises the enjoyment of life before the arrival of old age. College Vergard, roses, which literally means, pick virgin the roses, and is a metaphor similar to Carpe Diem but applied to female beauty, described always following the same plan: a young blonde, with serene, clear eyes, white skin, red lips, rosy cheeks, etc. The Beata Sila praise of life in the country, apart from material things, as opposed to life in the city, with its dangers and intrigues. The Locus Eminus, a description of a perfect and idyllic nature. Baroque. In the Baroque of the 17th century, important topics of the prose of Francisco de Quevedo and Baltasar Gracián. The theatre is notable, and poetry, with Luis de Góngora and Francisco de Quevedo. In the works of Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, notable novels are La Galatea and Don Quixote de la Mancha. The Baroque style used exaggerated motion and clear, easily interpreted detail to produce drama, tension, exuberance, and grandeur in sculpture, painting, literature, dance, and music. The Baroque is characterized by the following points. Pessimism. The Renaissance had not achieved its purpose of imposing harmony and perfection in the world, as the humanists intended, nor had it made man happier. Wars and social inequality continued to be present. Pain and calamities were commonplace throughout Europe. An intellectual pessimism took hold, which increased as time passed. This was shown by the angry character of the comedies of that epoch, and by rascal characters on which the picturesque novels are based. Disillusionment. As the Renaissance ideals failed, and, in the case of Spain, political power was being dispelled, disillusionment continued to arise in literature. Many cases recall those of 2 centuries before, with the Danza de la Muerte. A Manrix coplaza la muerte de su padre. Quevedo said that life is formed by successions of deceased. Newborns turn into the deceased, and diapers into the shroud that covers lifeless bodies. This leads to the conclusion that nothing is important except obtaining eternal salvation. Worry about the passing of time. Loss of confidence in the Renaissance ideals. Enlightenment. In the Enlightenment of the 18th century, with the arrival of the lights to Spain, important topics of the prose of Fray Benito Geronimo Feijó, Gaspar Melchor de Jovellanos, and José Cadalso, the lyric of the Salmantine school, the lyric of the Madrilenian group, and the lyric of the Sevillian school, and also the theatre, with Leandro Fernández de Moratín, Ramón de la Cruz, and Vicente García de la Huerta. Enlightenment thinkers sought to apply systematic thinking to all forms of human activity, carrying it to the ethical and governmental spheres in exploration of the individual, society, and the state. 3 phases in the Spanish literature of the 18th century are distinguished. Anti-Baroquism. It fights against the style of the preceding Baroque, which is considered excessively rhetorical and twisted. The recreational literature is not cultivated, but they are more interested in the essay and satire, utilizing the language with simplicity and purity. Neoclassicism. It is strongly influenced by French and Italian classicism. The writers also imitate the old classics. Its boom extended since the reign of Fernando VI until the end of the century. Pre-Romanticism. The influence of the English philosopher John Locke, together with that of the French Étienne Bernard of Condillac, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Denis Diderot, will cause a new feeling, dissatisfaction with the tyranny of reason, that emphasizes the right of the individuals to express the personal emotions, among which figures fundamentally love. This current announces the decline of neoclassicism and opens the door to Romanticism. Romanticism. Early Romanticism appeared with the singular figure of Manuel José Quintana. In Romanticism, important topics are the poetry of José de Espronceda and other poets, prose, which can have several forms, José Zorrilla, and other authors. In the latter Romanticism appear Gustavo Adolfo Bécquer and Rosalía de Castro. Some anti-romantic poets are Ramón de Campoamor and Gaspar Núñez de Arce, in part a revolt against aristocratic, social and political norms of the Enlightenment period and a reaction against the rationalization of nature. In art and literature, Romanticism stressed strong emotion as a source of aesthetic experience, placing new emphasis on such emotions as trepidation, horror, and the awe experienced in confronting the sublimity of nature. It elevated folk art, nature, and custom. The characteristics of the works of Romanticism are rejection of neoclassicism, contrary to the scrupulous severity and order with which the rules were observed in the 18th century. The Romanticist writers combine the genres and verses of different measures, at times mixing verse and prose. In theatre, the rule of the 3 units is despised and they alternate comedy with drama. Subjectivism. Whatever kind of work it is, the exalted soul of the author pours into it all his feelings of dissatisfaction against a world that limits and breaks the flight of his desire, about love, society, patriotism, etc. They do so in such a way that nature fuses with their state of spirit and it is melancholic, tetric, mysterious, dark, as opposed to the neoclassicals, who barely showed interest in the landscape. the longings for passionate love, desire for happiness, and possession of the infinite cause a discomfort in the romanticist, an immense deception that from time to time carries them to suicide, as is the case of Mariano José de Lara. Attraction to the nocturnal and mysterious. The romantics situate their aching and disillusioned feelings in mysterious and melancholic places, such as ruins, forests, cemeteries. Similarly, they feel an attraction toward the supernatural, things that escape any logic, such as miracles, apparitions, visions of the afterlife, the diabolic and the witch-like. Escape from the world that surrounds them. Rejection of the bourgeois society in which they are forced to live makes the romanticist be evaded from his circumstances, imagining past epochs in which their ideals prevailed over the others, or being inspired in the exotic. In contrast with the neoclassicals, who admired the Greco-Latin antiquity, the romanticists prefer the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Among the more frequent kinds of works, they cultivate the novel, legend and historic drama. Various are the themes of the Romanticist works. Oneself, in Esperanceda's Song de Teresa, a heart-wrenching confession of love and disillusion, he has managed to poeticize his feelings with great success. Passionate love, with sudden, total deliveries and quick abandonments. Exaltation and distaste. They are inspired in legendary and historic themes. Religion, although it is often in defiance of the consequent compassion and even exaltation of the devil. Social demands. Nature, shown in all its modalities and variations. Usually set in mysterious places, such as cemeteries, storms, the rough sea, etc. Satire, connected with political or literary events. Realism. In realism, which is mixed with naturalism, important topics of the novel, with Juan Valera, José María de Pereda, Benito Pérez Galdós, Emilio Pardo Bayes and Leopoldo Alas, Armando Palacio Valde, and Vicente Blasco Ibanez. Poetry, with Ramón de Campoamor, Gaspar Núñez de Arce, and other poets. The theatre, with José Echegaray, Manuel Tamayo Huibos, and other dramatists, and the literary critics, emphasizing Menéndez Pelayo. Realism offered depictions of contemporary life and society as they were. In the spirit of general realism, realist authors opted for depictions of everyday and banal activities and experiences, instead of a romanticized or similarly stylized presentation. The realistic works of this period are characterized by objective vision of reality through the direct observation of customs or psychological characters. They eliminate any subjective aspect, fantastic events, and every feeling that moves away from reality. The novel is the image of life, an artistic copy of reality. Defense of a thesis. The narrators write their works approaching reality from the moral conception. They are the so-called omniscient narrators. The defense of a thesis usually compromises the objectivity of the novel. Themes that are familiar to the reader, marital conflicts, infidelity, defensive ideals, etc. The popular and colloquial language acquires great importance since it situates the characters in the real environment. Sketch. Middle Ages epics. The Lay of the Cid, poem de Fernan González Mosadades de Rodrigo Alfonso X, Juan Ruiz Gonzalo de Baseo, George Manri. Renaissance and Baroque. The classical prose. Anonymous. Fernando de Rojas Alonso de Ursula Bernal Diaz del Castillo Bernardino de Sahagun. Mateo Alemán, Baltasar Gracián, Miguel de Cervantes. A classical Spanish theatre. Juan del Encina, Lope de Rueda, Guillén de Castro, Lope de Vega, Pedro Calderón de la Barca, Tirso de Molina, Juan Ruiz de Alarcón. Spanish classical poetry. Garcilaso de la Vega, Juan Bosque and Fray Luis de Leon, Luis de Góngora, Francisco de Quevedo, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila. Philosophy. Francisco de Vitoria, Juan Luis Vives, Antonio de Nabria, Gómez Pereira, Bartolomé de las Casas, Francisco Suárez, Luis de Molina. The 18th century neoclassical prose. José Cadalso, Benito Jerónimo Feijó, José Francisco de Ila, Gaspar Melchor de Jovellanos. Neoclassical poetry. Tomás de Iriarte, Juan Melende Valde, Félix María Samaniego. Neoclassical theatre. Vicente Garcia de la Huerta, Leandro Fernández de Moratín. The 19th century romanticists. Romantic prose. Juan Donazo Corte, Mariano José de Lara, Marcelino Menéndez Pelayo. Romantic poetry. Manuel José Quintana, Gustavo Adolfo Becker, José de Espronceda, Rosalía de Castro. Romantic theatre. Adelardo López de Ayala, Antonio García Gutiérrez, Juan Eugenio Hartzenbusch, Francisco Martínez de la Rosa, Duque de Rivas, José Zorrilla. Realists. Benito Pérez Galdós, Leopoldo Alas Claren, Vicente Blasco Ibáñez, Emilio Pardo Bazán, Enrique Gaspar y Rimbaud, Pedro Antonio de Alarcón, Armando Palacio Valde, José María de Pereda, Juan Valera, Concepción Arenal. The 20th century generation of 98 prose. Angel Ganive, Pío Baroyo, Miguel de Unamuno, José Martínez Ruiz. Azoran poetry. Antonio Machado, Manuel Machado, Mario Satz. Theatre. Jacinto Benavente, Ramón del Valle Inclán. Generation of 27. Rafael Alberti, Vicente Alexander Damaso, Alonso Manuel Altalaguirre, Luis Cernuda, Gerardo Diego Garcia Lorca, George Guillén, Leopoldo Pinheiro, Emilio Prados, Pedro Salinas, Miguel Hernández. Philosophy. George Santillana, Maria Zambrano, José Ortega y Gasset, Alexandra Deulofeu, Julian Marias, Fernando Cerveta, Xavier Zubiri, Eugenio Dawes. Prose. Camilo José Sala, Fernando Fernand Gómez, Miguel Galib, Gonzalo Torrente Ballester, Manuel Vázquez Montalbán, Max Orb, Salvador de Madriaga. Poetry. Ramón Gómez de la Serna, George Sempron, José Luis Cano, José María Pemen. Theatre. Santiago Razzanol, Alejandro Carsona, Antonio Buero Vallejo, Manuel Azana, Fernando Arrabal, Paloma Pedrera.